What if the strangest part of Easter happened in the dark, while everyone upstairs assumed the story was finished? Not at sunrise, not with trumpets, down where no lamps burned, no birds sang, and nobody expected surprise visitors. You can feel why that would rattle people. In this world, death is not a poetic idea. It has an address. Hey guys, tonight we begin with the long, uneasy dark between the cross and the resurrection. We're going to walk the streets of Jerusalem after the execution, slip behind shuttered doors where friends whisper and flinch, and feel what it meant to believe the dead had gone somewhere under your feet. So before you get comfortable, take a moment, like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Congratulations, you've just woken up in Jerusalem on the Sabbath after the crucifixion. The good news, the city is quieter than it was yesterday. The bad news, quiet does not mean peaceful. Your feet still hurt. By now, you assume everybody else's do too. Yesterday involved a lot of standing, stumbling, following crowds, getting shoved, and trying not to vomit from grief, heat, and the smell of blood baking into wood. The city has that awful after-party feeling, not the fun kind. The kind where cups are overturned, wax has dripped everywhere, somebody is crying in the corner, and no one knows who is supposed to clean up the emotional catastrophe. Smoke clings to everything. Little oil lamps have burned through the night in houses where nobody wanted darkness, but nobody wanted to talk either. The air indoors is thick with old flame, stale bread, sweat trapped in wool, and that sour human smell that shows up when people have been crying for hours and forgetting to wash. You try not to inhale too deeply. Bad plan either way. You are in a room with the shutters pulled tight, not for ambience, for fear. The wood is split and rough under your fingers. A draft slips through anyway, because ancient windows are terrible at being windows. It snakes across the floor and under your robe, and suddenly you understand why everyone in old paintings looks uncomfortable. They were. Someone nearby has fallen asleep sitting up against a wall. Their mouth is open. Their neck is bent at an angle that would ruin your week, maybe your month. Another person is awake but pretending not to be, because conversation means saying his name out loud, and saying his name out loud makes everything worse. The lamp smokes. The wick needs trimming, but nobody has the energy, so it just sits there, producing the biblical equivalent of a sad little headache. Outside, Jerusalem is pretending to rest. It is not resting. You can hear sandals scuffing stone in the lane below. A donkey complains to the universe with the exact voice of an ancient rusted gate. Somewhere, a baby starts crying, then another, because babies have impeccable timing for communal despair. A cart rattles over uneven paving stones. A dog barks once, and then thinks better of it. Somewhere farther off, men are speaking low and fast, in that special tone people use when repeating something they absolutely should not be repeating. Rumors move through the city like cold air under a door. You don't see them enter. Suddenly, they're just there, touching your ankles. Did you hear the curtain tore? Did you hear the sky went strange? Did you hear the earth shook? Did you hear his body was taken? Did you hear the governor washed his hands? Did you hear the teacher said something about rising? Nobody says these things at full volume. This is not a city full of brave, well-rested heroes. This is a city full of people glancing over shoulders and lowering voices so fast they nearly swallow their own teeth. Yesterday was public. Today is private and somehow worse. Yesterday had noise, hammering, shouting, orders barked in 3 directions at once, the roar of a crowd finding new ways to be disappointing. Today has silence, and silence is much more creative. It fills every corner with possibilities you do not want. You picture the hill outside the city. You don't want to, but there it is anyway. The posts, the ropes, the stains, the trampled dirt, flies arriving like they were invited, and then the tomb. A new-cut tomb sounds respectable until you remember what that means. Fresh stone, a carved shelf, air that tastes like mineral dust and sealed-up damp. A place meant to keep a body still while time does what time does, which is frankly rude. You can almost feel the cold of the rock through the cloth, the stillness of hands that healed people, the absolute offense of it. Dead means dead here, not symbolic, not a mood, not gone but in our hearts. Dead is a place you go. That thought settles over the room like wet wool. In your world, the dead do not become vague inspiration floating around in sunbeams. They go down, under your feet, out of reach, beneath the fields, beneath the roads, beneath the house where somebody is currently reheating lentils and trying to act normal. Down into the earth, into the deep place of dust and shadow, where voices are thin, and kings sit around looking no more impressive than shepherds. It is the most depressing waiting room imaginable. No windows, no breeze, no cushions, no helpful attendant sliding open a little panel to say your number has been called. Just the great underplace where the generations have gone, piled one age upon another, like humanity got swept under the same grim rug. That thought lives in the room with you now, because if he truly died, then he truly went where the dead go. Not to a dramatic cloud platform, not to a glowing lobby with background music. Down where Adam is dustier than ever. Down where old grief sits. Down where hope goes to stare at the wall. And upstairs, the living are falling apart in very human ways. One woman has cried so much, her eyes are swollen almost shut. Someone else keeps replaying his last words, as if repeating them enough times might reverse them. One of the men is doing that thing where he paces 3 steps, stops, rubs his beard, and stares at the floor like the floor personally caused all this. Nobody has eaten properly. There is bread, but it has gone leathery at the edges. There are olives in a bowl, wrinkled and slick. Someone found dried fish, which is generous of them if their goal was to make the room smell even sadder. Your mouth is dry anyway. Grief does that. Fear too. And fear is not being subtle. The door bar has been checked more than once. Every sound in the alley gets everybody's head turning. A knock right now would send half the room into the ceiling. You can hardly blame them. Yesterday proved what public power looks like when it has had a bad afternoon. Soldiers, officials, shouting, spectacle, and a hill full of warning. This city knows how to make examples of people. So they wait. They wait in wool that scratches, in sandals that have rubbed blisters raw, in rooms where the lamp oil is low and the night smells like smoke, tears, and unwashed hope. They wait while the city settles onto its rooftops and courtyards, while cooking fires sink to embers, while priests sleep, while guards stay posted, while somewhere beyond stone and soil, a darkness older than Jerusalem keeps its mouth shut. And under all of it is that dreadful heavy thought. He is not merely gone from sight. He is among the dead, So above ground, everybody thinks the story has hit its worst and final stop. The teacher is buried. The stone is set. The city is exhausted. Even the rumors sound tired. But beneath the feet of the grieving, beneath the paving stones and burial caves and roots of olive trees, there waits a place no living person visits on purpose. And tonight, that place is about to receive someone it was not prepared for. The city above finally goes quiet, and below it, far below it, the waiting does not. You feel it before you see it. The world of the living has edges, torchlight, cooking smoke, doorways, barking dogs, somebody arguing over lentils. Like this is the crisis of the century. But down here, all of that is gone. No flames flicker, no bread bakes, no sandals slap a stone street. You step into a place ancient peoples spoke of with the same enthusiasm you'd use for describing a flooded basement full of dead rats. This is Sheol, Hades, the pit, the land of dust. And wow, what a dump. There is no sunrise here. That part matters more than you expect. You don't realize how much your soul depends on a little patch of gold on the horizon until it is permanently cancelled. No dawn, no afternoon, no evening lamps being lit. Just a dim, depthless gloom, as if the air itself gave up years ago and never recovered. The ground is not soft. Of course it isn't. It's stone, packed earth, gravel and old dust that clings to your feet and your hem, and somehow also gets into your mouth. You taste grit immediately. The whole place tastes like an abandoned wine jar, and the back corner of a tomb had a child together. Dry, stale, mineral, wrong. You swallow and regret it. The air doesn't move much either. No breeze, no fresh gust sneaking in under a door, no pleasant little nighttime coolness. Just stillness so complete it feels used, breathed before, kept too long. It smells like sealed chambers, old bones, damp rock, and human existence after all the lively parts have been professionally removed. And the silence is not peaceful. This isn't a monastery silence. This isn't a snowy field silence. This is waiting room silence. Endless waiting room silence. The kind where everyone has been there too long, nobody has updates, nobody can find the receptionist, and even your worst enemy looks too tired to continue being your worst enemy properly. You look around, and the first horrifying thing is how ordinary everyone seems. Ancient kings are here. Conquerors, judges, shepherds, merchants, mothers, brickmakers, poets, loudmouths, cowards, bullies, beloved grandmothers, men who once thought themselves very important. They all arrive with whatever dignity they managed to maintain during the collapse of the body, and the place strips it off them like cheap paint in bad weather. Crowns do not impress the grave. Muscle does not impress the grave. Titles certainly do not impress the grave. Everybody is equally unimpressive in low light. That is one of the oldest insults death ever invented. The mighty come down here, and suddenly they are just more dead people sitting around. The bully who made whole villages miserable? Dust and sandals. The prince with embroidered robes and 12 servants? Also dust, but with slightly nicer fabric decaying around him. The beggar from outside the gate and the man who owned the gate are now neighbors in the same cheerless district, and nobody is thrilled. You sit with them long enough and you start to see the etiquette of this place. Nobody hurries because to where? Nobody plans for tomorrow because there is no tomorrow down here in the way you mean it. Nobody says, I'll do that after harvest, or next spring, or when the children are older. Time in this place is all elbows and no destination. It just leans on you. Nobody down here is treating death like a fireworks finale or a glowing graduation ceremony. This is what they feared: a going down, a being gathered to shadows, a long, low existence with all the color washed out of it like cheap dye in bad laundry. And the furniture situation is appalling. There isn't any, really. No cushioned benches, no woven mats worth mentioning, no little stool tucked conveniently in a corner. If you're hoping for the underworld to at least offer a respectable place to sit, lower your standards immediately. Mostly you get stone ledges, rough ground, and the kind of leaning posture that guarantees your back would ache if your body still handled discomfort in the usual way. No pillows, no blankets, no privacy. That last one is almost funny. Human beings spend so much of life trying to maintain some shred of dignity. You want a door that closes, a corner to yourself, a place to cry where nobody sees you doing that ugly face. Down here, forget it. Kings, prophets, and fools all inhabit the same grand, miserable communal arrangement. It's the eternal version of sleeping in a bus station, except the bus never comes and everyone is dead. The smell settles into layers the longer you stay. Dust first, bone-dry dust and old stone. Then that faint cave dampness, only without the charm of actual water anywhere useful. Then something older, flatter, harder to name. Not rot exactly. Rot implies a process still happening. This is what remains when the process is mostly over, and all you're left with is memory in the walls. You breathe through your mouth. It doesn't help. You hear voices now and then, not lively conversation, more like murmurs, recollections, scraps of grief, names spoken softly into a place not known for giving them back. Somebody remembers vineyards. Somebody remembers sheep. Somebody remembers cedar smoke and warm bread, and the feeling of sun on the shoulders. That part is almost worse. The dead do not simply vanish in the old imagination. They remember enough to miss things. A man who was once a warrior sits with his hands open, staring at them as though he expects a spear to appear. It does not. A woman mouths the names of children grown old and dead long after she arrived. A ruler who once made entire cities kneel sits in the same dimness as a field worker whose name never made it past 3 houses and a goat. Down here, the field worker has exactly as much leverage, which is to say, none. Death is the most ruthless equal opportunity landlord you've ever encountered. Everybody gets the same lease, and the amenities are insulting. No music worth having, no feasts, no fragrant oil, no windows, and absolutely no working plumbing, which in any age is a red flag. Not that there are tiled washrooms down here waiting to disappoint you. There are not. There is no running water, no basin, no neat little clay pitcher with a folded towel nearby pretending civilization still cares. This is not a spa. This is the place people imagined when they were trying to say, with full honesty, yes, death is real, and no, it is not charming. The old songs of the living knew this place as silence and forgetfulness. Not always complete forgetting, more like being cut off from the land of active things. You don't plough here. You don't sing festival songs here. You don't climb the temple hill here. You don't wake to roosters or complain about taxes or lose an argument with your wife or spill grain or fix a broken hinge. All the bustling stupidity of ordinary life is gone. That is the horror. Not pain with flames and shrieking, at least not in this older picture. Just absence, diminishment. existing in a realm where every sentence begins with once. Once I had vineyards. Once I marched with armies. Once I held my son. Once I sat under fig trees. Once I laughed hard enough to snort wine through my nose and embarrass myself at a wedding. Now look at us. You keep walking, and the place stretches farther than it should. That is another nasty feature. Sheol never feels crowded in a comforting way. It feels endless in a bureaucratic way. Corridors of shadow, chambers of earth, carved spaces in the dark, all of it somehow making room for every generation that has ever sighed its last. The architecture, if you can call it that, is cave, pit, hollow, chamber, gate. Less palace than quarry, less house than wound in the ground. Ancient people pictured bars and gates sometimes, because of course they did. Once you think of death as a place, your mind starts furnishing it with prison hardware. Bronze gates, iron bars, shut doors, bolts that don't slide back. It's the cosmic version of you can't leave your seat until the ride has fully stopped. Except the ride stopped centuries ago, and still nobody's lifting the bar. You notice something else. No one arrives here on purpose. It sounds obvious. Down here, it lands differently. People are dragged here by age, disease, battle, famine, childbirth, betrayal, accident, fever, snakebite, structural collapse, and all the other cheerful methods the world has invented for ending a human day. Nobody packs a bag and says, "Well, off I go voluntarily into the pit." Sounds refreshing. Death is what happens to you. It overtakes, it seizes, it lowers, it gathers, it closes over your head like water over a dropped stone. That was the dread. Not just dying, going down. You can feel why people recoiled from it. In the world above, even your worst day still has texture. You can feel heat. You can smell soup. You can stub your toe on a threshold and say words that would definitely get you judged by your grandmother. You can hear children fighting over figs. Life is annoying, dirty, inconvenient, and glorious. Down here, all that busy friction is gone. It is existence with the flavor removed, and all classes come here. The thought hits hard enough to make your teeth hurt. You spend your life trying to avoid becoming one of those people left outside the feast, outside the wall, outside the conversation. You collect, bargain, flatter, threaten, build, hoard, marry strategically, breed heirs, polish your reputation, trim your beard with great seriousness. Then death arrives like an uninvited official with terrible manners, and suddenly you are in the same dim region as the guy who cleaned your stable. No VIP lounge, no velvet rope, no. Do you know who I am? The answer is yes. Dead. You're dead. So the kings look around and see old enemies. The enemies barely care. Everybody has bigger problems, though bigger is generous in a place where nothing moves. Sometimes one old ruler taunts another. Sometimes some exhausted soul mutters at the newly arrived, "So, you also became weak like us." It's almost darkly funny. The ancient dead can still manage a little sarcasm. Apparently, that survives the trip. Good for them, honestly. A little bite is all anyone has left. You drift through this world of dust and shades, and every now and then some scrap of former grandeur flashes absurdly in the dark. A name once feared in battle, a face once stamped on seals. A prophet who used to stop rooms cold now sitting in the dimness with everyone else, looking like a man waiting for his turn at a government office that lost his paperwork. The underworld has a gift for reducing everyone to person in line at an office that definitely lost your paperwork. And the line does not move. No wonder people prayed to be spared from going down too soon. No wonder songs rose from sickbed saying, "Not yet, please not yet," because who wants to trade sunlight for this? Who wants to leave vineyards and daughters and bread ovens and warm stones and spring lambs and noisy arguments for a place where memory is the main remaining activity? Even the strong dreaded it, especially the strong. Strength feels so temporary when you know the pit gets everybody eventually. You pause near a cluster of the dead and realize they are not asleep in the way you hoped. That would be easier, weirdly. Tuck everyone in, pull up oblivion like a blanket. Let the whole thing be one long, dreamless shut-eye. But the old imagination often gives them awareness. Faded, reduced, shadowed awareness. But enough. Enough to know they are cut off. Enough to recognize arrivals. Enough to feel the longness of waiting. That waiting stretches over generations. Empires rise above. Down here, nobody gets the memo. A city is built. No one down here sees the scaffolding. A temple gleams in sunlight. No one down here squints at the gold. Armies clash. Dynasties collapse. Merchants cheat. Children are born. Songs are written. Bread is needed. Roofs leak. Goats scream like tiny demons with personal grudges. Above ground, history keeps having one dramatic episode after another. Below, the dead remain in the same vast low chamber, stuck in the divine equivalent of buffering. And then you reach the part nobody likes to say out loud. This place is not just where bad people go. It's where people go. That is what made it so bleak. Not because every ancient person imagined exactly the same details. They didn't. But there is this broad, grim sense. Death takes the whole human family into its keeping. The good, the wicked, the ordinary, the half-decent, the embarrassing uncle, the woman who fed everyone, the landlord who cheated everyone, the child who never got enough years, the elder who got too many. Into the earth they go, into the silence, into the region where praise feels far away. You can see why burial mattered so much. You can see why tombs mattered. A grave wasn't only a hole, it was a doorway, or at least people feared it like one. Once a body was laid down and the stones set and the mourning done, the thought wasn't merely, "He is gone." It was, "He has gone down." Into what? Into this shadow country beneath memory and soil, where the dead are gathered and remain. So when people spoke of the pit opening its mouth, that wasn't decorative language. It felt like geography with teeth. And what a geography it is. The walls sweat a little in some chambers. In others, everything is dry enough to flake apart at a touch. Dust lies in corners thick as old flour. The floor crunches underfoot with grit and chips of stone. Some places narrow until you feel the weight of the earth above your head, all that dirt and rock and buried history pressing down. Other places open into caverns where the dark seems to pool like standing water, only meaner. You keep expecting a torch on the wall. Nothing. A window slit. Nothing. A bored attendant with a tablet and a terrible attitude. Also, nothing. Zero customer service in the kingdom of death. No directions, no refreshments, no explanation for delays. People simply are there, which is haunting in a way that fire almost isn't. Fire is active. Fire does something. This does almost nothing, and that almost is unbearable. It strips a person of projects. Human beings are built for projects. You want to mend, stack, sort, season, sweep, stir, build, kiss, wash, complain, carry, fix, and occasionally sit down with a cup and be left alone for 5 blessed minutes. Down here, there is none of that. The dead are deprived not merely of joy, but of errands. An afterlife with no errands. Catastrophic. You may laugh, but half of being alive is needing to do one more thing before dark. Here there is no dark because there is no light. Only the same dim understate, where memory drifts around like smoke that can't find a ceiling. And sometimes new arrivals disturb the air. That is the closest this place comes to excitement. A fresh death means movement, a stir among the shades, another soul entering the old commonwealth of the gone. The dead turn, insofar as they turn. They look. Who now? A child? A soldier? A merchant? A queen? Someone famous? Someone no one famous would ever have noticed? In life, those distinctions made whole systems spin. Down here, arrivals still matter, but mostly because they break the monotony. That is grim enough already. But the real shock comes when you think about what it would mean for someone to go here on purpose. Not by being overtaken, not dragged, not swallowed against their will like everyone else since the first funeral. Purpose, intention, descent chosen, not merely suffered. You stop walking. Even the dead seem to understand how absurd that sounds. Who would enter the pit willingly? Who sees bronze gates and says, yes, there, that's where I'm headed? Who looks at the kingdom of the dead, with its stale air and joyless dust and communal disappointment, and decides not merely to endure it, but to go there deliberately? Not as victim only, but as visitor. Not because death won and dragged him down like everybody else, but because he means to enter the place itself. Outrageous. That sounds less plausible than someone choosing a long weekend in a sewer for spiritual growth. No one does that. People pray to avoid this place. They bargain to postpone it. They cry out from the edge of it. A man sinking in deep waters feels death and begs not to be shut up in that dark. The sick ask to be raised from their bed before the pit closes. The grieving tear garments because a beloved person has gone where hands can't reach. Ancient people did not stand around romanticizing the underworld. They feared it like a locked cellar under the whole world. You feel that fear now in the stale air. You understand why families clung to one another around deathbeds, why they wailed, why they carried bodies quickly, why they touched the dead with grief and caution, why tombs were sealed. Because once someone crossed that threshold, there was no ordinary return. A person might be remembered, mourned, honored, fed with tears and stories, but the road itself was one-way traffic. Down into the earth, into the chamber of shades, into the long communal waiting where kings stop being impressive and beggars stop being overlooked, because everyone is flattened into the same dim persistence. That is the world hanging beneath your feet while the city above keeps breathing. Jerusalem above has its ovens cooling, lamps guttering, shutters pulled closed. Families lie down. Priests wash. Guards shift spears from one hand to another. Mothers hush fussy babies. Somewhere a dog noses through rubbish and finds something disgusting enough to celebrate. The city carries on with all the stubborn business of being alive. But under every doorstep lies this older thought. Under every graveyard, under every hill, under every field where blood once dried and vanished into dirt. The dead wait below, not in comfort, not in glory, in dust, in shadow, in the house of lowered voices and unfinished memories, in the place where old tyrants and old shepherds sit equally still. In the region, no sane person volunteers to enter. which is why the coming claim lands like a hammer in a tomb. Because one day people would whisper that somebody did. Somebody went down there on purpose. Somebody entered the oldest prison with wounds still open. Somebody crossed into the land of dust, not as one more helpless shade, but as a king no darkness had managed to make ordinary. And down in that eternal stone waiting room, where the air never freshened and the line never moved, the waiting was about to end. The noise goes first, not all at once, more like a market closing after a riot. One voice leaves, then another. Sandals scrape. Somebody coughs. A woman is still crying somewhere off to your left, that raw kind of crying that sounds like it tears the throat on the way out. But the hammering is over now, and without it, the whole hill feels wrong, like a room after musicians stop, and you realize how much of the evening was just noise, hiding dread. The air smells of iron, dust, sweat, and old blood warming on wood. You try not to breathe through your nose. There is nowhere else to go. You stand near the cross long enough for your calves to ache. Soldiers shift their weight, bored in the professional way of men who have done ugly things so often they now treat horror like paperwork. One checks his nails. Another squints into the distance. A few people drift away in clumps, muttering, glancing back, doing that very human thing where you leave slowly because part of you still cannot believe what you just watched. The sky has already done its worst. The darkness that rolled over the afternoon has thinned, but nobody seems comforted by that. If anything, the returning light only makes everything look more embarrassing. The blood is real. The wood is real. The bodies sag with the heavy, graceless weight of the truly dead. There is no dramatic music, no wind machine, just a hill outside a city, and the awkward fact that the one people hoped might change everything is hanging here with his chest gone still. And then, after the shouting, after the sky, after the spear, comes the part hidden from almost everyone alive. You feel the world narrow. Up on the hill, there is flesh, splinters, torn skin, a face slack with death. But follow the last breath down. Follow it past the noise, past the gasping crowd, past the flies already conducting quality control. Follow it into that strange ancient place beneath every grave, where all roads eventually end, whether you are a shepherd, a king, a tax collector, or a man who thought that rash in the desert would probably clear up on its own. Down. The descent is not a staircase. It is not a neat tunnel with torches and handrails, thank God. It feels more like being drawn under deep water, where sound changes first. The world above goes muffled, then distant, then absurdly unavailable. The shouting on the hill thins into almost nothing. The city disappears. The sky disappears. Color gives up and leaves. You keep moving anyway, down into the old waiting place. You know it already from the last stretch of the journey. That broad kingdom of dust. That underworld with all the charm of a storage cellar no one has cleaned since the dawn of agriculture. Stale air, stone that sweats. No sunrise, no breeze, no mattress unless you count dirt and disappointment layered generously across rock. This is where the dead go. Not the heroes only, not the villains only. Everybody. The bullies and the babies, the judges and the pickpockets, the women who baked bread until their shoulders gave out, the soldiers who never made it home, the shepherd who slipped in a ravine, the prince with opinions, the widow with cracked hands, the fool, the saint, the adulterer, the poet, the man who insisted he could fix that wheel himself and immediately proved otherwise. All of them end up here, in the great leveling basement of humanity. And now he comes here too. That is the shock of it. Not a ghostly idea. Not some noble, almost death where he hovers tastefully near the edges and then leaves before the smell gets bad. No. He goes where corpses go, where mourners imagine their loved ones have gone, where everyone fears the beloved have gone, into the depth, into the prison, into the lower parts of the earth, the oldest cellar, the locked room under the locked room. You expect, perhaps, less of him here. You expect death to strip him the way it strips everyone. That is what death does. It removes titles with humiliating efficiency. King, beggar, mother, merchant, prophet, idiot with a very confident goat trading strategy. It all ends the same. Dust on the skin, silence in the mouth. Everyone equally unimpressive. Everyone reduced to the flat, bleak citizenship of the grave. But he arrives with the wounds still visible. That detail lands like thunder in a cave. He is dead, truly dead, carrying the marks of execution on him. The torn scalp, the pierced side, the hands, the feet. The body bears everything the world did to it. Nothing has been airbrushed. This is not a polished victory portrait with flattering lighting and zero blood. He has come through suffering, not around it. And still, somehow, authority has not left him. It is the strangest thing to witness. He enters the kingdom of the dead, like a king who has crossed into enemy territory without changing clothes. No escort, no chariot, no trumpet section trying too hard. Just wounds and silence, and a presence that makes the place itself feel suddenly less certain of its job description. The dead notice. Of course they do. Imagine waiting in the oldest, dreariest holding room in existence, where nothing new happens except additional dead people arriving with depressing regularity. And then suddenly one enters who does not belong to the rhythm. One who comes in with the smell of earth and blood from above still on him. One whose very stillness is active somehow, as if rest itself has become deliberate. Heads turn in the dark. The kings who used to swagger on polished floors sit up from their stone gloom. The forgotten poor lift their faces. Prophets lean forward. The ones who died young and the ones who were very tired of being old both listen. The place where speech has long felt useless stirs with the faint rustle of expectation, thin as dry grass, but there. It is not loud. That is one of the eerie parts. You might expect a cinematic breach, cracks in walls, fireballs, a soundtrack trying to win awards. Instead, the first movement is quiet. So quiet it almost insults the imagination. He stands among the dead, and the silence gathers around him not as emptiness but as attention. Even prison has a way of listening when the right voice enters. Somewhere in that depth are spirits shut in, ancient prisoners with all the patience scraped out of them by time. Souls who have waited longer than empires lasted. People who once lived under open skies and now sit in this stale underworld where even memory feels dusty around the edges. They know what confinement is. They know what no exit means. They know the ache of hearing no footsteps coming for you. And then there are footsteps, not hurried, not panicked. No one is running down here because where exactly would you run? But the movement of him through the dark carries purpose. He does not wander like a tourist who took a wrong turn trying to find the temple and ended up in the abyss. He comes as one who knows why he is here. The old prison feels it. Stone has a way of holding memory, This place has held centuries of resignation, layers of sorrow pressed down like old sediment. It knows the heavy tread of the conquered. It knows the limp shuffle of those who arrive with death still fresh on them. It knows grief, regret, weariness, and that flat, dead silence of people who have no more errands to run and nowhere left to go. It does not know this. A dead man entering death as if on business. You move with him through that depth, and the place keeps widening. Not physically, maybe. It is still a miserable underworld. No hanging gardens, no cheerful courtyards, no refreshments. But awareness spreads through it. The way a smell reaches a whole house. The way rumors outrun runners. Something is happening in the pit, and the pit has not had an original thought in a very long time. The guards of such a place, if you can call them that, are not welcoming. No one down here has a tray of figs and a charming orientation speech. There are bars in the imagination of this realm, gates of bronze, iron locks, bonds, cords, doors swollen with age and shut by force. The whole place exists to keep what enters from leaving. That is its brand. That is its entire customer promise. You come in, you stay in. End of policy. Yet he steps farther in. Not as prey. That matters. He is dead, yes. He has entered fully into the human end, but he is not being dragged. Death has taken him, and still he comes with the unnerving composure of someone who has agreed to be there. That changes the room immediately. Jails are different places when someone enters by choice. He carries no weapon you can see, no sword at his side, no spear, no bronze gleaming in the dark. His power is stranger than that, and, frankly, more alarming. The marks of death are on him, but death has not made him obedient. The wounds speak two languages at once. He was truly struck, truly pierced, truly killed, and somehow none of that has emptied him of command. It is a terrible thing for hell to discover. You can almost feel the old fear in the place, deep and structural. Not fear of violence exactly. This realm has seen violence for ages. Bloodshed above drops bodies below like a rotten supply chain. No, the fear here is of interruption, of authority arriving, of someone speaking into the ancient arrangement and not asking permission first. And he speaks. Not with the strained rasp of the cross, not with a dying man's broken breaths. The voice that moves through the underworld carries weight, not theatrical weight, not actor on a stage weight, real weight, the kind that settles into stone, into chains, into all the places where despair has made itself furniture. The message runs through the dark, to the dead, to the imprisoned, to the waiting ones who had lived and lost and been laid down beneath the soil with all their promises unfinished, to those who died trusting and those who died confused, and those who died with only the dimmest grasp of hope. He announces something in the kingdom that had always assumed itself final. Death is not as permanent as it thought. That lands hard. For ages, this domain has operated like a bureaucrat with absolute confidence. Stamp the file, lock the gate. Next body. No appeals. No supervisor. No hotline. Nobody gets out, and nobody from above comes down to challenge the policy. Then one day, a crucified man arrives, still bearing the receipt of his own execution, and starts talking like the ownership structure has changed. You can see why the place would be upset. The dead gather close now. The old ones first, perhaps. Those whose waiting has stretched beyond counting. Those who remember promises spoken over altars, in deserts, beside rivers, in exile, in caves, in whispered prayers over sickbeds and battlefields. They have have held fragments for generations, half-lit hopes, strange assurances, a sense that the grave might not get the final sentence, though from where they sit it certainly looked like it had. Now the sentence continues. He is not there merely to sympathize. He does not descend just to pat the dead gently on the shoulder and say, "Yes, terribly sorry about all this. Very grim accommodations, absolutely appalling damp situation." No, he comes proclaiming, declaring, bringing news into the one place that had never expected good news to cross the threshold. That is why this descent matters so much. He goes to the far country beneath all countries, to the sealed compartment, to the prison under the prison, to the common destination of every son of Adam and daughter of Eve. He does not save humanity from a safe distance. He enters the last human place, the place where tears have stopped only because there is no strength left for them. And even there, he is himself. The same one who ate with sinners, the same one who called the dead to rise, the same one who told frightened people not to be afraid, which is a lovely sentiment unless you are in a storm, in a tomb, or in the underworld, in which case it feels wildly ambitious. Yet here he is, still carrying that same impossible authority into the dark beneath creation. The dead know authority when they hear it. Kings knew it poorly, but they knew its sound. Slaves knew it too well. Widows heard it in decrees that ignored them. Soldiers heard it barked in camps. Priests heard it in sanctuaries. Children heard it at tables. Everyone who ever died brought some memory of power with them, whether abused, feared, envied, or obeyed. This authority is different. It does not smell like greed. It does not arrive padded by flattery and bodyguards. It has passed through humiliation, torture, public shame, and an execution yard full of mockery, and yet in the depths it remains whole. Not unhurt, whole. That difference matters in your bones when you stand there. Because a wounded king is one thing, a wounded king still giving orders to death is another. The underworld had seen the dead arrive carrying injuries before, split skulls, broken ribs, marks of plague, war, childbirth, hunger, beasts, weather, and human stupidity. The grave is full of people killed by tragedy and by absolutely preventable nonsense. Men crushed by walls, children taken by fever, travelers lost in floods, farmers who thought that bull looked calm enough to approach. The pit receives them all. But no one had entered like this, bearing wounds that looked like defeat and wearing them like credentials. He moves deeper, past the oldest griefs, past the stale memory of empires that once thought themselves immortal and are now just names in the dark, past warriors without their swords, rulers without their thrones, laborers without their tools, mothers without their children in their arms. In death, everyone gets stripped of props. Nobody gets buried with enough stuff to matter here. He matters here. His presence exposes the underworld's bluff. Death had always presented itself as the final landlord, the grim collector, the keeper of the keys, the one office nobody can avoid. Yet the minute he arrives, keys no longer feel secure. Locks look temporary. Gates start looking less like eternal architecture and more like old hardware waiting to fail under pressure. The darkness shifts around him, not fleeing, not yet, more like realizing it is no longer unobserved. That is a dreadful sensation for anything that has grown comfortable in secrecy. This realm has been hidden from the living, tucked under grief and dirt and fear. Human beings spoke of it with lowered voices and grim resignation. You go down there, and that is that. But now someone has gone there and is not impressed. You almost want to laugh, except the moment is too heavy for a full laugh. Still, there is something gloriously offensive about it. Death has arranged itself for millennia as the one undefeated tyrant, and now a battered, executed man walks in and behaves like he owns the building. Which, in a way, he does. The ones nearest him begin to understand first, not with academic neatness. Nobody in the abyss is making tidy bullet points. They understand the way dry ground understands rain, the way prisoners understand a key turning in the lock after years of hearing only rats and distant dripping. Something promised has arrived in person. The atmosphere changes. It is still the underworld. Still stone, still dust, still no windows, and no amenities worth mentioning. But expectancy enters, and expectancy is a violent thing in places built on despair. It cracks routines, it wakes names, it pulls people to their feet who had nearly forgotten standing was possible. You feel that movement spreading. Far corners of the dead place stir. The old line of humanity from the earliest graves onward senses disturbance. Ancestors, prophets, the crushed and forgotten, those who died in faith and those who died waiting for the faith to ripen into sight. They do not yet stream out. That great breach is still ahead. But the first note has sounded in the dark. The king has entered the prison, and because he has entered it, the prison is already no longer merely prison. The descent continues beneath your feet and in your chest. Above, Jerusalem keeps pretending the day is ending normally. Lamps are lit, doors are barred, bread is broken in houses where people whisper and jump at every sound. Soldiers wash their hands and complain about duty. Priests speak in careful tones. The city exhales, thinking the worst has happened. It has no idea. Below all that stone and sleep and ordinary evening business, the dead have received a visitor. Not a victim only. Not a shade drifting into the population count. A herald, a king, a conqueror who has chosen to conquer by dying, which is not anyone's first strategy, and frankly sounds ridiculous until it starts working. He stands in the depth with wounds bright as testimony. The grave has him and cannot settle him. The prison holds him and cannot quiet him. The dark surrounds him and does not know what to do with him. So the underworld listens. And far off in its oldest chambers, bolts sit in their sockets, bars strain in their places, and ancient gates begin to learn that being shut is not the same thing as being secure. Because the dead are not alone down there. They have been waiting a very, very long time. You feel it before you see anyone. The place changes. Not brighter exactly. Nobody has installed cheerful lighting in the underworld. But the darkness gets crowded. It has the stale, packed feeling of a family gathering that began centuries ago and somehow never ended. With nobody allowed to leave, nobody opening a window, and every conversation picking up exactly where it died. There are people everywhere, not bustling, not thriving. This is not a market. It is far too quiet for that. But they are there in clusters, in rows, along stone ledges, against pillars, on ground worn smooth by generations of waiting. Kings with no thrones, shepherds with no flocks, midwives, widows, judges, liars, labourers, warriors, children. All the old human categories collapsed into one grim dress code: dust, shadow, memory. And among them are the names that have been hanging over everything for ages. You move deeper through that old assembly, and it feels less like entering a tomb than stumbling into the world's oldest family reunion. Except everyone is grey, nobody brought food, and all the small talk is about grief. You pass faces that once terrified armies and faces that once nursed babies by firelight. Now they all sit in the same stale air, smelling faintly of earth, old wool, dried sweat, and that mineral cold you get in caves where sunlight has personally never visited. Then you see him. Adam does not look regal. That would be a bizarre choice. He looks like the first man got hit with the first embarrassment and never fully recovered. Broad-shouldered still, yes. Weathered, heavy-handed, with the look of someone who spent a very long time working reluctant soil because of one disastrous conversation in a garden. But there is no crown on him. Just a face that has remembered too much for too long. He is sitting on stone like a man who has sat on stone for ages because there has been, frankly, nothing else available. When he lifts his head, you catch in his expression that old wound no fig leaf ever fixed. Not just guilt. Guilt is sharp. This is older than that. This is the ache of having once known a world with no graves in it and then watching every grave after. Abel, then others. Then so many others the names blur into a river of funerals. And near him is Eve. You expect grandeur, the mother of all living, something severe, luminous, queenly. Instead, you find a woman who looks as if she has endured childbirth, exile, hunger, arguments, seasons of sorrow, and more family drama than any mortal person should reasonably be issued. There is strength in her, real strength, but also memory, especially memory. You do not need anyone to explain what she is carrying. A garden once, fruit once, a voice once, a son buried by another son. The long humiliation of living long enough to see what pain does when it multiplies. She has that look some old mothers have even now, the one that says they have seen enough foolishness to fill oceans and are no longer surprised by anything except tenderness. Adam glances toward her more than once, as if the habit survived death. That part gets you. Even here, in the underworld, with the air stale as old pottery and the floor cold enough to offend your bones, they are still husband and wife, still the first pair, still carrying together what they broke, what they lost, and what they could not mend. It is almost unbearably human. Not far off, Abel is there too. Of course he is. He is not dramatic about it, which somehow makes it sadder. No speech, no grand posture. Just a quiet man whose life was short and whose blood hit the ground before cities had proper walls. Cain's younger brother, the first one to arrive in this place by violence. You can feel around him the strange dignity of someone wronged early and remembered long. And yes, the family resemblance is awkward. This is what nobody puts on the brochure for humanity. The afterlife waiting room contains your parents, your murdered brother, and eventually all your descendants. Personal space is a myth. Privacy is extinct. Every unresolved thing is now sitting 6 feet away, though down here even 6 feet starts feeling generous. A little farther on, Abraham watches. He has the face of a man who once left everything because God said go, and then spent years camping badly in foreign places. You can almost smell it on him still. Smoke from old fires, sheep, leather, sun-baked cloth, and that permanent outdoor scent of someone who had no fixed address and made it everybody else's problem. He does not seem restless. He seems alert, as if waiting became part of his bones long before death. Sarah is near him, and there is wit in her expression even now. You look at her and think, yes, this is a woman who laughed at impossible promises and then lived to see one screaming in a tent. She has the air of someone who knows exactly how ridiculous the whole thing often was. Moving camp again, another famine, another king behaving badly, another trust me moment with no map, no timeline, and definitely no mattress worth discussing. Isaac is there. Jacob too. Jacob looks like trouble survived into old age and then kept going. Even in the dimness, he has that wiry, unfinished energy, as if he might at any moment bargain with an angel, a brother, or a stone pillar if given half a chance. You can practically feel the old limp in him. He leans like a man who once fought in the dark and never stopped walking with the memory. And Joseph is not far away, which makes the family atmosphere even more complicated. Imagine this forever. Your father, your brothers, the son with the dreams, the whole coat-related fiasco, famine, reconciliation, tears, wagons, Egypt. Now all of them in the same realm, year after year, with nowhere to storm off to. There is no spare room in Sheol, no private courtyard, no, I just need a little space. Ancient forgiveness gets very practical when the alternative is sitting 3 arm lengths from your brother for several centuries. Moses is impossible to miss. He still carries mountain weather around him somehow. You catch the scent of dry wilderness, campfire smoke, old wool and something like storm air trapped in stone. His face has that used-up authority of a man who spent 40 years managing complaints in the desert from people who were, with respect, exhausting. He looks like he has heard every possible variation of, "Are we there yet?" and would rather not hear another. There is still a little fire in him, not loud, not showy, but you see it in the set of his jaw, in the way he holds himself, like a shepherd who once walked into a tyrant's court and came out with a nation. The sea parted, the mountain shook, the law was given, and after all of that, here he sits in the dark with everyone else. No VIP lounge, no special sandals, just Moses, son of dust, waiting. Aaron is nearby, and yes, there is brotherly history hanging between them thick as old incense. So is Miriam, and you get the feeling she could still start a victory song at the drop of a tambourine if someone would only provide one. There are prophets and priests and sisters and elders all folded into this dim crowd, and each one carries some little residue of the life above. Desert in the hair, temple smoke in the clothes, river mud on the memory. Then David. Oh, David. Even death has not made him less David. He is beautiful in the worn way old bronze can still catch light, though there is not much light to catch. His eyes are alert, wounded, and dramatic enough to write 3 psalms before breakfast, if breakfast existed. It does not. Terrible place. But he would still manage. Sit him on a stone in eternal dusk, and somehow he still looks like a man about to sing, confess, collapse, rejoice, and beg for mercy all within the same paragraph. You can almost hear him muttering lines to himself. Not polished court poetry now. Something lower, a tune for the pit, a song for when your crown is gone, your enemies are dead, your children are dead, your victories are history, and all you have left is the God you kept calling on from caves, palaces, battlefields, rooftops, and consequences. Down here, stripped of drums and servants and national mythology, he is just a man with a heart too large and a life too messy. And he is not alone. Solomon is there too, which is almost funny in a bleak way. All that wisdom, all those proverbs, all that gold, all those wives, all those building projects. Now he sits in the same dust-toned stillness as shepherds and brickmakers, probably with enough time at last to regret several hundred decisions. It turns out death is the great simplifier. The silk rots, the cedar cracks, the taxes no longer matter. Saul is there somewhere too, though nobody seems eager to make eye contact. You keep moving. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel. Voices that once shook cities, now speaking softly or not at all. Jonah with the unmistakable energy of a man who had a bad attitude on land, sea, and apparently into the afterlife. Ruth with patient strength still clinging to her like a shawl. Hannah with the deep calm of one who once wept in a sanctuary and was heard. Job, somehow both ruined and unruined even now. The place is thick with unfinished stories. That part hits hardest. Not merely the number of people, the waiting. Every face seems tilted toward a promise that never fully landed during their own lifetime. They had pieces, glimpses, a word here, a rescue there, a king, a covenant, a sacrifice, a return, a song, a whisper that one day something would be set right. But one day is a rude phrase when you are dead. Down here, calendars are useless. Dawn forgot the address. Some sit in peace, some in weariness, some with the stubborn endurance of people who learned above ground that hope is often little more than refusing to spit on the promise when it takes too long. They have all been carrying scraps of expectation like worn fabric in a closed fist, frayed, thin, still not thrown away. You drift past conversations that sound less like talk and more like embers. A shepherd asks a king whether the world above ever learned mercy. A widow asks whether her sons were remembered. An old judge grumbles. A child leans against a grandmother. A prophet, who spent most of his life being ignored professionally, sits in perfect gloomy silence that says, quite clearly, I did in fact warn everybody. Somewhere nearby, someone laughs, and the sound is so startling in this place that several heads turn. The laugh comes from David, who is telling some impossible story with his hands. You do not catch every word, but you catch enough. A giant, a stone, a spear thrown in a palace, bread eaten in hiding, spittle on a beard. One of those old survival tales that sounds less noble and more feral when retold honestly. Abraham shakes his head with tired amusement. Moses looks like he has met dramatic men before and was never impressed. It is strange how tender the whole place becomes once populated. Still dreadful, still cold, still one decorative choice away from a very depressing storage cellar, but less abstract now. Death is not an empty concept. It is your ancestors gathered in one shadowed country, carrying old injuries, old faith, old songs, old shame. Humanity stacked generation upon generation in one vast basement nobody asked to inherit. And then there are the children. You were not ready for that. A boy asleep against his mother's side. A girl with braids undone. Infants who were barely held above ground before being handed down here, where they are sheltered now in arms that learned loss too young. The underworld has old warriors in it, yes. It also has babies. That detail lands like a stone in your throat. The place does not care how long your story was. It kept receiving everyone until receiving everyone became its entire personality. No wonder the old ones waited. No wonder they remembered promises with the stubbornness of the starving. If anyone had once spoken of a day when graves would not keep what they swallowed, of a servant, a son, a king, a shepherd, a seed, a branch, a redeemer, a holy one not abandoned to decay, then every whisper of that would matter here. Every line would be handled and rehandled in memory like a scrap of cloth from home. You see it in Eve most of all. She looks sometimes toward Adam, sometimes into the dark ahead, as though listening for something older than her grief. A promise spoken in the wreckage of the garden, a bruise and a crushing, a child to come, and one after, and generations after that, carrying both the wound and its answer through history like a candle guttering in bad wind. Abraham knows that listening too. A father who nearly lost a son and got him back. A man who was told all nations would somehow be blessed through his line, then died before seeing much. Besides tents, trouble, and descendants who were not exactly low maintenance. Moses knows it. David definitely knows it. The prophets know it with the exhausted posture of men who delivered messages nobody wanted framed above the mantle. They have all been leaning towards someone, not always clearly, not with polished certainty, more like travelers hearing rumors of water while crossing a miserable desert and deciding, for reasons they can barely explain, to keep walking. Down here, there is no walking out, only waiting. So the leaning becomes inward, expectation held under ribs, hope so old it has gone quiet. Then the quiet changes. At first, it is almost nothing, not a sound exactly, more like pressure in the dark, a disturbance, the way air changes before a storm, except storms are at least somewhat familiar, and this is not. Heads lift. Conversations stall. David stops mid-gesture. Moses straightens. A child wakes. Across that wide assembly of the dead, attention gathers from 1,000 corners at once. Something is coming. You feel it through the stone underfoot. That should be impossible, but this whole place has already surrendered its right to complain about impossible things. There is a trembling in the depths, slight at first, then steadier, as if somewhere far off a door no one has opened since the first funeral has taken a hit. Dust sifts from cracks. The stale air stirs. Not much, just enough to make everyone notice how long it has been since it moved. Adam stands. The first man rising in the land of the dead is not a small sight. His face is changed, not because he understands everything all at once, but because recognition brushes him before explanation does. Eve rises with him. Abraham rises. Sarah too. Moses gets to his feet with the old weariness of someone whose knees have opinions, but he rises. David is up in a heartbeat, every nerve awake. All around, the long line of waiting begins to stand. It happens unevenly. An old woman first, then a prophet, then a child hoisted onto a hip, then kings, then shepherds, then the nameless and the remembered, all lifting themselves from stone and shadow because something in them answers before the mind can catch up. The whole realm seems to inhale. You did not know the dead could do that. Apparently, there are many things nobody told you. The darkness is no longer settled. It shivers. A murmur runs through the crowd, and it is made of names, titles, half-finished memories, promises spoken long ago and never fully spent. Seed, son, Lord, branch, lamb, king, deliverer. The words move through the people like sparks through dry grass, catching where old hope was stored. Nobody says all of it clearly. Nobody needs to. The expectation has lived here too long to require a formal introduction. David's eyes are bright now, almost wild. For once, the drama is justified. Moses looks toward the deep with the expression of a man who once saw water split and has just realized that was not even the strangest thing God intended to do. Abraham's mouth opens slightly, then closes. Sarah grips his arm. Eve is very still. Adam looks like a man standing at the edge of the first morning and the last at the same time. Then there is light. Not the tame kind, not lamplight with smoke in it. not sun filtered through dust. Nothing soft, nothing decorative, nothing produced by human hands and a little oil. This comes into the dark like authority, like judgment, like rescue. It does not drift politely. It enters. The shadows recoil hard enough to look almost solid as they pull back along the stone. Several of the dead shield their faces out of pure instinct. Others stare. You stare too, because there in the advancing brightness is a figure still marked by wounds. Not erased wounds, not hidden, carried. Hands that have been pierced, a side opened, the marks of death still visible on the one now walking where death believed itself landlord. He does not arrive as a victim dragged in by force. He comes as someone who has crossed the threshold on purpose and has every right to be there, which is exactly the sort of development that makes ancient prisons deeply uncomfortable. Everything in the place knows it. The air seems thinner. The stone seems less certain of itself. The long habit of despair, built over generations like grime in the corners of a neglected house, begins to lose confidence. Adam takes one step forward, then stops, as if afraid motion might break the moment. Eve's face is wet now, though how tears work in the land of dust is nobody's business. The old ones know him before they understand how they know him. That is the strange beauty of it. The one dimly expected, the one promised in fragments, the one foreshadowed in sacrifices, songs, rescues, covenants, and impossible births. The one every buried hope was awkwardly leaning toward without seeing his face. He is here now, in the oldest dark, with the wounds of the world still on him, and something stronger than death moving with him, like fire with a heartbeat. No one speaks for a breathless moment, even David. That may be the greatest miracle so far. And in that pause, the whole place seems to gather itself around one impossible fact. The waiting is over. And now we arrive at the part nobody talks about enough. The locked place does not stay locked. You feel it before you see it. A change in the air, not fresh air. Nobody is getting a mountain breeze down here. But the stale stillness shifts, like a room full of old people at a funeral, suddenly realizing someone important just walked in. The dust lifts. The dark that had been sitting comfortably in every corner like it pays rent starts acting nervous. That gets your attention. All around you, the dead stop their muttering. Adam straightens. Eve turns. Abraham raises his head. Moses, who has spent a very long time looking like a man waiting outside a meeting that keeps getting delayed, goes perfectly still. David is halfway through what was absolutely becoming another dramatic speech and just freezes with his mouth open. Even the bullies go quiet. Somewhere farther in, chains scrape over stone. Heavy ones. The kind that sound less like hardware and more like an argument that has lasted since the beginning of the world. You hear metal groan, a low, ugly noise, as if the underworld itself has rolled over in bed and discovered a cramp in its back. Then comes the sound. Not thunder exactly, more like bronze taking offense. You turn toward the far dark where the old gates stand. Everyone knows those gates. Nobody likes those gates. They are the architectural embodiment of number bronze doors, greened with age in places, blackened in others, taller than a city wall and uglier than a tax collector's smile. Iron bars cross them like clenched fists. Rings, bolts, hinges, locks. Layers and layers of ancient security, because this place has one job and takes it personally. Keep them in. That is the whole business model. The ground trembles again. Dust shakes loose from the lintels. Somewhere a crack runs through stone with a sound like dry bread snapping in the hard hands. You hear a hiss ripple through the gathered dead. Nobody knows whether to step forward or back. There is no evacuation plan. Of course, there isn't. This is the oldest prison in creation. It was built by people who assumed nobody would ever leave. And then you see him, not drifting, not wandering, not looking confused like a traveler who took the wrong tunnel and ended up in the world's worst basement. He comes forward with wounds still in him and authority still on him, which should not be possible. And yet, there it is. The marks are visible. The life is visible too. That is the unsettling part. Dead, but not held. It is like seeing fire walk into a cellar full of wet wood and mold. The rulers of this depth have no category for it. Neither do you. The whole place had counted on death being a one-way door, the kind with no handle on your side. Enter, sit down, lower expectations forever. That was the arrangement. Nobody signed it willingly, but everyone arrived eventually. Now someone has shown up from the inside carrying a handle. He keeps walking. The dark around him is not gone exactly. It recoils. It gathers itself away from him the way stray dogs back off when somebody bigger enters the alley. Shadows cling to the edges of columns, hollows empty. The old kings and mothers and children and prophets all lean toward him, hungry and stunned, like people smelling bread after a famine. The gates shudder. One blow lands, though you cannot tell with what. Foot, hand, voice, authority, it hardly matters. The bronze doors ring out with a sound so deep you feel it in your ribs. The bars jump in their brackets. Rust falls in bitter flakes. A lock the size of a man's chest spits out one of its pins and lets it clatter across the stone. You actually flinch. Nobody breaks these gates. That is why they are gates. A second impact. Louder. This time the hinges scream. Not metaphorically. They scream. A long metal shriek rises through the caverns, setting teeth on edge and making the dead stare at one another like, is this allowed? Is there a procedure for this? Who do we complain to? There is no complaint desk, obviously. There has never been a complaint desk. Customer service in the realm of the dead is just a wall. The bars bend, not politely, not a little. They wrench sideways with the ugly violence of roots splitting a tomb. Rivets pop out and fly into darkness. One ring tears free from the gate and spins over the floor, clanging and wobbling before collapsing in a slow, offended circle. It sounds weirdly pathetic. A lot of ancient evil does, once it starts losing. The whole prison convulses. Deep below, deeper than burial, deeper than memory, something old wakes up angry. You hear it move through the foundations. This is not just a place. It has been ruled, guarded, kept. There is strength down here, hard and grasping, the kind that has spent ages collecting names and bones and final breaths. And now that strength has company, it did not request. You feel, more than see, the confrontation, like two storms meeting underground, one cold, one burning. One gathers, one advances, one hoards, one opens. The oldest dungeon in the universe suddenly has a breach, and everybody in it knows that whatever happens next will not fit back into the old routine. Then the doors burst inward. Bronze crashes against stone so hard the shock knocks dust from the ceiling in grey curtains. One leaf tears off a hinge and slams flat. The other hangs crooked, split near the bar, twitching with the last aftershocks. The iron lock is no longer a lock. It is scrap. Twisted metal, bent teeth, ancient confidence having a very bad evening. The dead stagger back. Some scream, some laugh, some just stare with that exhausted, disbelieving look people get when the impossible finally arrives, and it is somehow noisier than expected. Adam shields his face from the torrent of dust. David starts to say something heroic, and then thinks better of it, because there are, for once, no better lines. Beyond the broken threshold, the darkness is moving, not away, up. You see shapes there, wardens or powers, or the underworld's idea of management, and they are in trouble. They have spent ages dragging people downward by fear, guilt, violence, sickness, grief, age, war, snakebite, childbirth, famine, bad kings, worse neighbors, roofs collapsing, wells failing, bread running out, lungs giving up, blood spilling, bones breaking. Business has been excellent. Human beings kept dying for one stupid reason after another. It was a steady market. Now the inventory is looking unstable. He goes through the gates like they were reeds. You follow because of course you do. Everyone does. This is not the moment to stand back pretending dignity. There are times for composure and times for craning your neck like a nosy neighbor in sandals. This is the second one. You move over shattered bronze, stepping around iron pins and chunks of stone. Under your feet, the floor shakes with impacts you don't fully understand. Ahead, in the deepest chamber, the strong man waits. That is the only way to think of him. Thick with possession, armored in accumulated fear, the keeper of this old captivity. You do not get a clean look at his face, and maybe that is mercy, because some things become more disgusting the better lit they are. He feels like locked jaws, like a fist around a throat, like every grave insisting it is final. He's not pleased. Chains lash out, hooks, bonds, all the old hardware of captivity. You hear them whip through the dark and strike stone, sparks jumping. One wraps around a pillar and crushes it at the base. Another skates over the floor near your feet, leaving a bright scar in rock. This is the kind of security response nobody wants to trigger. But the one who entered death does not retreat. He meets the assault and takes hold of it. You see the chain go taut in his hands. That terrible old instrument, polished by generations of despair, now straining uselessly the wrong way. For a moment, everything holds. The chamber groans. Dust rains down. The dead gather in rings behind you, packed shoulder to shoulder, every face turned forward. Abraham's mouth has fallen open. Moses grips his staff so hard his knuckles pale through the dust. Eve is crying, but not like before. Then the chain snaps. The crack echoes through the caverns like the world being split for repairs. The strong man lunges. There is force there, raw and ancient, all appetite and possession. But this is no frightened soul arriving alone. This is the one who has gone all the way down carrying obedience like a blade. Wounds in his flesh, breath in his chest, judgment in his stride. He closes the distance fast. You almost miss the exact moment it turns. One instant, the keeper of death is raging, towering, clutching, trying to reassert the old order by volume alone. The next, he is down, bound with his own tackle, pinned in the ruins of his own security system, like a landlord crushed by collapsing shelves in a hoarding basement. There is a grim satisfaction to it. Ancient tyranny loves chains until it wears them. The whole chamber erupts, shouts, gasps, weeping. Somebody near the back starts laughing in shocked little bursts, the kind you cannot control because your body has run out of normal responses. David definitely begins crying and singing at once, which for him is honestly on brand. Moses looks like a man seeing seawater stand up all over again. Adam just stares. You would too. Because now comes the part no one dared expect in full. He turns from the bound enemy to the waiting ones. Not to inspect them. Not to lecture them. Not to run a background check and make everybody fill out forms proving they had the correct amount of tragic nobility. Imagine that. No clipboard, no gate interview, no little table with a bored angel asking whether you packed liquids or sharp objects. He goes straight to the captives, straight to Adam, the old man who once took fruit and handed all his children a funeral eventually, the father with dirt in his memory, the one who has had ages to regret a hand reaching the wrong direction. He is enormous and broken-looking down here, like an uprooted tree that somehow kept thinking. His face is all shame and longing, and the King of Glory does not shake his hand. He grabs his wrist. That matters. You see it clearly. This is not a polite greeting between equals at a courtyard feast. Adam is not helping. Adam is being hauled. The grip is firm, almost urgent, fingers around the joint as if pulling a drowning man through surf. Ancient icons loved that image because a handshake would suggest Adam climbed out under his own power. Absolutely not. This is rescue, not networking. Adam comes up like a man remembering bone and breath at the same time. Eve is next. Her eyes are fierce even through tears. She has lived with the memory of gardens and graves, with the ache of sons lost to envy and blood, with every labor pain and funeral somehow touching back to that first hunger. When he takes her by the wrist, she rises too, and the look on her face would flatten empires. Behind them, the line breaks open. Abel comes forward. Noah, Abraham, Sarah, with laughter not bitter anymore. Isaac blinking like a man who cannot believe ram and altar were not the final words. Jacob limping. Yes, still limping somehow, because apparently even in redemption some people insist on bringing their whole personality. Joseph steps from the shadows, still carrying prison and perfume in equal measure. Moses comes with wilderness in his beard. Miriam sings before her feet even settle. David reaches the front and immediately has too many emotions. Of course he does. He falls, gets yanked upright, tries to say something worthy of a king, ends up sobbing instead. The man has written psalms from caves, rooftops, battlefields, adultery, repentance, and family disasters so messy they make modern group chats look healthy. Now he can only stare. Words fail him, a miracle in itself. Isaiah stands there as if every coal and vision and promise has just walked out of metaphor and into muscle. Jeremiah looks wrecked in the most vindicated way imaginable. Ezekiel, frankly, seems delighted. This is exactly the kind of strange, oversized symbolic chaos he always thrived in. If anyone down here expected wheels within wheels to lead to a prison break, it was him. John the Baptizer is already pointing. You knew he would be. The whole waiting world surges toward the broken doors, not a panicked stampede, more like floodwater finally finding an outlet. Mothers clutch children they have not held in ages. Old men straighten. Faces that had gone dim with waiting begin to look sharp again. The place itself cannot contain the motion. Sheol had specialized in stillness, and now stillness is losing control of the room. Underfoot, the broken locks grind and slide. Above, somewhere impossibly far, earth remains quiet. Tombs stay sealed. Houses stay shuttered. Cookfires burn. Someone in Jerusalem is probably scraping burned lentils from a pot and complaining about the price of oil. Life above has no idea the underworld is experiencing an administrative collapse. Down here, however, things are getting wonderfully out of hand. The prison raid keeps moving. You pass storehouses of sorrow emptied by force. Chambers where old accusations had been stacked like jars in a pantry, now cracking open and spilling uselessly across the floor. Hooks hanging loose, nets torn, registries ruined. Death had records. Death likes records. Names, generations, dates, all the tidy little receipts of mortality. They flutter now in dust and fragments, as useful as damp parchment in a goat pen. Everywhere, doors stand open. Some have been torn clean off. Some hang split. Some have simply given up, their bolts shot and bars on the floor. You get the sense that this whole kingdom was built on confidence, the kind that never bothered preparing for resistance. Why would it? Everyone came eventually. Time did the recruiting. Pain handled the transport. Then someone arrived whom time could not digest. He moves ahead of the crowd, and the crowd follows through widening passages, lit by a brightness that does not come from torches. No smoke, no sputtering wick, no greasy lamp smell, just light, clean and cutting, spreading over stone that had not seen anything but shadow. It enters cracks. It reaches corners. It reveals stains nobody wanted revealed. The underworld has the worst housekeeping. Along one wall lies a heap of smashed keys. Dozens. Hundreds, maybe. Great, ugly things. Black iron and bronze, all teeth and weight, fit for giant locks and giant fears. He has them now. You hear them drag and clash as he walks, the defeated jangle of stolen authority. It is the sound of a jailer discovering his keyring on somebody else's belt. Beautiful noise. The dead keep becoming less dead-looking. That is the strangest part. Color returns by degrees, not to skin exactly, but to presence. Shoulders lift, eyes focus. Hope does weird things to posture. People who had been slumped for centuries now look as if they remember standing under sun. You can almost smell open air on them already, though there is no open air yet. Freedom arrives before scenery changes. At one point, you look back. The strong man remains bound amid fallen stone, furious and useless. The gates lie broken around him. Bronze and iron, all that magnificent old certainty reduced to rubble. It is almost embarrassing. This prison had presented itself as eternal. Turns out eternity belongs to someone else. That lands hard. You keep going. The upward paths are not gentle. This is no ceremonial staircase with flowers and musicians. It is rough passage, steep and uneven, hacked through ancient rock, smelling of dust, old damp, and the sharp, hot tang of shattered metal. Sand shifts under sandals. Bits of chain bite your ankles. Somebody stumbles, gets hauled up by 3 others immediately. Nobody is getting left. That also matters. The one leading them does not save in tidy little individual appointments, calling names from a waiting room and asking everyone else to remain seated. This is a liberation, a people being brought out. The whole old family mess of humanity moving together, saints and strugglers and former disasters, all of them dependent on the same grip. The image keeps repeating, wrist after wrist, hand after hand, pulling, lifting, drawing upward. A child too small to climb gets carried. A bent woman finds her back straightening as she rises. A shepherd, a widow, a king, a prophet, a labourer, a mother whose infant died before she learned his face properly, a thief who had one decent prayer left in him at the end. They come. Not because the dungeon suddenly became kinder, Not because death had a change of heart, because death got raided, and not by a committee. The passage steepens, the light strengthens. You hear behind you the last crashes of collapsing bars and the distant fury of what has been defeated but not allowed to keep the room. Ahead, there is space, opening, the first suggestion that down is no longer the only direction available. The whole company surges toward it, laughing, crying, singing, gasping like people who have been underwater too long. David finds his voice again, unfortunately for everyone nearby. But even that sounds good now. Songs break out in fragments, not polished choir stuff, nothing coordinated. This is what happens when generations of grief get their mouths back at once. Snatches of psalms, cracked old promises, names of gods spoken like water swallowed too fast. Miriam catches a rhythm. Isaiah answers. Someone starts blessing the one who came down. Someone else falls to the ground and kisses the dust, because even this dust is on the way out. You realize with a jolt that the underworld is behind you, not gone, broken. There is a difference. Its gates are shattered, not because nobody will die above again for a while, but because death no longer gets to pretend it is the landlord of everything. The dungeon has been entered, its keeper bound, its captives claimed. The oldest enemy in human experience has just been hit in the mouth inside his own house. That is the shock of it. He did not stand at a safe distance and shout advice through the bars. He did not send a map. He did not lower a rope from somewhere comfortably untouchable. He entered the depth itself, walked through the stink and silence and human backlog of sorrow, and broke the place open from the inside. Unauthorized entry on a cosmic scale, the kind you remember forever. Behind you, the broken bronze glints faintly in the receding dark. Ahead, the way rises. Around you, the rescued keep moving, still stunned, still gathering themselves, still touching their own wrists as if to confirm the grip was real. Adam walks with Eve, Abel beside them, Abraham with Sarah, Moses, Miriam, David, prophets, mothers, children, the poor, the nameless, the long-waiting, all carried in the wake of the one who would not leave death unvisited and would not leave its captives where he found them. The old dungeon does not get the last word. It never really did. It just took a very long time for anyone to hear the doors come down. Above ground, meanwhile, everyone assumes the story has gone cold. Jerusalem is doing that strange thing cities do after something horrifying. It keeps moving, not gracefully, not convincingly, but moving. A woman shakes out a rug in a courtyard. Somebody argues over onions. A pot lid clatters. A baby cries with the full offended outrage of someone whose life has not yet included theology and is therefore much simpler. The air still carries yesterday's smoke. You smell banked cooking fires, damp stone, old sweat, lamb fat, and the faint copper memory of blood that no amount of rinsing quite erases. The streets are quieter because it is Sabbath, but not silent. Never silent. Somewhere a door thumps shut. Somewhere sandals scuff over dust. Somewhere two men are speaking in low voices that immediately stop when anyone gets too close. Nobody says it plainly. They say things like, "Did you hear what happened by the gate?" And "Best not discuss it." And "The governor wants calm," which is ancient city language for everyone, is absolutely discussing it. Rumor slips under doors better than smoke. It crawls through alleys, around ovens, past sleeping dogs, and into every room where people are trying very hard to act normal and failing in fascinating little ways. You pass houses with shutters pulled tight against the glare. Inside one of them, the disciples are gathered in the stale half-dark, and the room smells exactly like fear would smell if fear had feet. Too many bodies, too little air, lamp oil, dust, unwashed wool, somebody's last piece of fish, the sour edge of panic sweating through linen. Nobody is sitting comfortably. How could they? The cushions are thin, the floor is hard, and grief makes every joint feel twice its age. A man paces 3 steps one way, 3 steps back, like a trapped dog trying to invent a door through pure annoyance. Another stares at the wall with the blank intensity of someone replaying the worst 24 hours of his life in high definition. Peter looks wrecked, not picturesque sad, not noble, wrecked. Eyes swollen, beard wild, shoulders folded in on themselves, as if he is trying to become smaller than his own mistakes. Every sound from the street makes him flinch. You can practically hear his mind doing that lovely human trick where it takes one terrible memory and chews it forever like old leather. No one knows what to do with their hands. They wring them, they fold them, they point with them, they cover faces with them. Someone reaches for bread and then doesn't eat it. Someone else drinks water as though it might solve betrayal, public execution, and the collapse of every expectation they had last week. It does not. The room keeps filling with the same suffocating thought. It's over. That brutal, flat little sentence. It's over. The one that lands in a body like a stone dropped into a bucket. And yet, outside, the city keeps tidying itself. A servant sweeps a courtyard in short, angry strokes, raising a thin, bitter dust that smells of ash, trampled herbs, and donkey traffic. A baker's oven is cooling. A family tears yesterday's bread, hard enough to chip a tooth if you get ambitious. Somebody is scrubbing a bowl with sand because soap, in the modern foamy sense, remains tragically unavailable. The Sabbath wraps everything in restraint. No one is rushing. No carts rattle at full speed. No market is roaring. Even grief has to sit still for a few hours. That may be the cruelest part. When disaster lands on a weekday, at least you can run around uselessly. On Sabbath, you mostly sit there with it. You and your thoughts. A terrible pairing. The women know where the body is. That knowledge sits inside them all day like a shard. They have seen the stone rolled into place. They know the smell that will begin soon because they live in a world without refrigeration, embalming fluid, or any of the modern conveniences that let people pretend death is tidy. They know how quickly a human body changes in spring heat. They also know they cannot do what they would have done. Not yet. Not until the Sabbath passes. So they wait with spices prepared or half prepared, hands remembering work that grief has postponed. Myrrh, aloes, linen, the practical tenderness of caring for the dead, delayed by one long sacred day that must feel about 11 years long. Mary sits with the kind of stillness that costs everything. People glance at her and then away again, because what exactly do you say to a mother after that? Nothing useful. Nothing that doesn't sound like broken pottery. Her face carries that emptied look grief gives, as if part of her has gone somewhere the rest of her cannot follow. Nearby, another woman wipes her nose with the back of her wrist and keeps blinking hard. The spices on the table smell sharp and sweet. Resin, oil, crushed leaves. They cut through the house air, but not enough. Nothing cuts through sorrow when it gets thick. It just sits there, taking up the room, making even breathing feel like labor. Every so often someone says his name. Then silence follows, because names are dangerous when they're attached to a body in a tomb. You say a name, and memory arrives with it. A road, a meal, a laugh, a command, a touch, a look. The kind of things that hit harder after they're gone. Out at the tomb, the officials are trying to be efficient about all this. Nothing says confidence like posting guards at a grave. Very relaxed, very casual. Definitely not the behavior of men who think this dead teacher's followers are harmless. The tomb sits in the garden with its stone sealed, and the seal itself has that officious little look of empire trying to make mortality file paperwork. The guards stand there pretending this is normal military duty. One shifts his weight because armor always pinches where you wish it wouldn't. Another squints into the light. Their sandals are dusty. Their mouths taste like old wine and onion from yesterday's rations. One of them keeps adjusting the strap under his chin because dignity is hard in a helmet when your assignment is, effectively, stare at rock. No one writes songs about this part. The waiting, the sweating, the trying to appear unfazed beside a sealed grave while birds make rude noises in nearby branches. A fly lands on somebody's cheek. He slaps it away with controlled irritation because Roman professionalism only stretches so far when insects are involved. They know the stories, at least in outline. The dead man had said things. People always say things. Kingdoms, rising again. Temple, days. It all sounds much less charming once your superiors have told you, with bureaucratic sternness, that under absolutely no circumstances are there to be any corpse-related surprises. So there they are, standing in a garden, guarding death as if death might try to wander off without supervision. Men with spears posted against a body wrapped in linen. Empire at its finest, very shiny, deeply confused. The stone itself looks immovable, heavy, round, wedged into place with all the finality a rich man's tomb can offer. You can see dust caught in its grooves. Tiny plants poke from cracks nearby. Ants continue their tiny private civilization, unconcerned with governors, prophets, or cosmic warfare under the soil. That is the eerie thing. Everything visible is stubbornly ordinary. A sealed tomb, nervous friends, women waiting to mourn properly, priests feeling relieved or trying to, soldiers on assignment, families eating Sabbath meals from chipped bowls, children fidgeting, lamps trimmed, courtyards swept, someone somewhere burning flatbread, because even in sacred cities, somebody always gets distracted and ruins dinner. Meanwhile, below all of it, the locks have already broken. But nobody above ground can hear that. No tremor rises through the paving stones. No helpful voice booms from the sky. No messenger appears in the public square with a trumpet and a bulletin. There is no live update, no town crier shouting, "Attention everyone! The underworld has suffered a catastrophic breach. History is being rearranged in total privacy." So the city spends the day misunderstanding everything. The chief priests, for instance, may finally feel some relief. Not joy exactly. More the exhausted satisfaction of men who have gotten through a political emergency without riots consuming the courtyard. They wash their hands, adjust their robes, eat their Sabbath meals, and sit with the fragile hope that the whole unpleasant business will now stop expanding. You can almost see them trying to unclench. The troublemaker is dead. The crowd has dispersed. The festival can proceed without another dramatic scene in the temple precincts. Perhaps, they think, the fever will break. Perhaps this movement will collapse under the sheer practical inconvenience of having its leader executed publicly. That thought must have tasted wonderful for a few hours, like cool water after panic, like finally unlacing sandals after a long day, like closing a door on a storm and assuming the roof will hold. They have no idea the storm is already in the basement, pulling the foundations apart with scarred hands. Pilate, for his part, wants a nap, a proper one. Not a governor's half-sleep full of petitions, complaints, and people trying to make provincial unrest his problem. He has signed off, washed whatever he could wash, and would very much like this feast to pass without a fresh crisis. The city is packed, tempers are thin, national hopes are running hot. It is the administrative equivalent of sitting on a barrel of oil while everyone nearby carries candles. He prefers boredom. Boredom is underrated. Boredom means no mobs, no reports to Caesar, no awkward letters explaining why another prophet turned into a riot. So he lets the tomb be sealed, lets the guard be posted, lets the priests fuss, and assumes the matter has been shoved into stone and silence. Above him, maybe swifts dart through the evening air. Below him, the old prison is emptying. Back in the room with the disciples, dusk thickens. The lamp flame gutters and smokes. Somebody finally tears the bread. It cracks with a sound too loud for the room. They eat because bodies insist on these humiliating routines, even when souls feel flattened. Chew, swallow, regret having a throat. One of them starts to speak and stops. Another mutters a memory no one asked for, and suddenly they are all there again in some other hour, on a hillside, in a boat, on a road. The room fills with scenes that hurt, not because they were bad, but because they were good and now seem finished. That kind of pain has teeth. Outside, the night air cools the stones. A dog noses at refuse in an alley. The smell from the bins is confident and vile. Rotting vegetable peels, fish guts, damp straw, and whatever that sticky patch is which nobody investigates because peace of mind matters. A man carrying water moves carefully in the dark. Somewhere a couple quarrels in hissing whispers through a wall thin as a prayer. The city is pretending to sleep now. It does this badly. Too many thoughts, too many stories circulating, too many people lying awake on mats that smell of reed, dust, and old bodies, staring into darkness and trying not to replay the afternoon. Some are grieving, some are relieved, some are angry they missed the spectacle, some are already bored and thinking about breakfast. Humanity remains consistent. You can be one courtyard away from mystery and still mostly worry about lentils, one lane over from redemption and still irritated by your neighbor's rooster. Civilization has always rested on this uncomfortable fact. The world can be changing forever while somebody nearby is trying to find a less lumpy pillow. In the garden, the guards trade quiet remarks. Not many. Enough to stay awake. One leans on his spear until another tells him to stand straight. Professionalism, again. A branch creaks overhead. The earth smells cool now, damp and mineral, with the green bite of crushed leaves under sandals. The tomb mouth sits there in the dark like a clenched jaw. Nothing appears to happen. That is what makes the moment so strange. If you had walked by, you would have seen exactly what everyone else saw. Stone, seal, soldiers, moonlight silvering rough ground, a dead man inside. End of story. Only it isn't the end at all. It is the pause after the battering ram has hit and before the dust clears. The breath between lock and opening. The still surface over deep current. Under the ground, ancient captives are being led out. Above the ground, a guard scratches his beard and wonders how many more hours until dawn. The mismatch is almost funny. Upstairs, somebody is snoring. Down below, history is getting its locks kicked off. All this monumental hidden movement, and above it, somebody is snoring. Somebody is scraping a pot. Somebody is muttering that they should have bought better olives. History is doing surgery by torchlight in the basement, while upstairs the dinner guests are complaining about the draft. Toward morning, the chill settles in. You feel it in the stones first, then in your fingers, then in your knees, because knees are traitors and always report weather changes before the rest of you. The city curls into itself. Lamps die one by one. Ash settles in braziers. Even the gossip grows tired. Still, no one knows. Not the women with their folded linens, not the disciples in their locked room, not the priests under heavy blankets, not the governor behind guarded doors, not the soldiers with sore feet and stale breath, not the city breathing shallow in the dark. They think heaven has gone silent. They think the grave has done what graves always do, held, kept, closed. They think Saturday is only Saturday, the flat middle day, the day after loss and before nothing, the day when all the bright words look ridiculous and all the promises sound overdrawn. But the deep places have already heard footsteps, and the dark has already given ground. So Jerusalem waits without knowing what it is waiting for. Fires burn low. Stone holds the nights cold. Men dream badly. Women wake before dawn with grief still sitting on their chests like a sack of wet grain. Guards stare at a sealed tomb and see only a sealed tomb. For one more stretch of darkness, the whole world looks unchanged. Courtyards, chimneys, bedding, dust, bread, guards, tears, seals, silence. Only the silence is lying. Because beneath that ordinary Sabbath hush, beneath the rooftops and lintels and sleeping dogs and hidden tears, the oldest doors in the world are standing open now. And above them, the city holds its breath. By the time you reach this part, you can feel why people held onto it so tightly. Not as a weird side note tucked between the cross and the empty tomb. Not as some gloomy basement scene for theology enthusiasts who enjoy arguing in long robes. You can see why generations held onto it, painted it on church walls, sang about it, whispered it beside graves, and refused to let it go. Because it answered something people were deeply afraid of. It answered whether Jesus only looked brave near the edge of death, or whether he actually went all the way in. Down to the place nobody escaped. Down to the silence. Down to the depth where names fade, bodies fail, and every human story seems to end in dust, wrappings, and a borrowed hole in the ground. That mattered. Because if he did not truly die, then suffering stayed partly untouched. Grief stayed partly unvisited. The grave remained one room in the human house that God had politely avoided entering. And nobody wanted a savior who hovered near the worst part with a hand over his nose, like he was passing a bad public restroom. The whole point was that he really went there, not almost dead, not dramatically unconscious, dead, buried, laid in the earth while friends wept, enemies relaxed, and the city moved on to supper. That is what gave the descent its weight. He did not rescue people from a safe distance. He entered the full human disaster himself, all the way to the bottom. And that old underworld mattered because ancient people did not treat death like a poetic metaphor. It was a place in their imagination, dim, dusty, shut, no music worth hearing, no windows, no cheerful receptionist sliding over a clay tablet and saying your chamber will be ready shortly. Kings and beggars ending up equally unimpressive in the same stale dark. Crowns gone crooked, swords useless. Everybody sitting around with the energy of travelers stranded overnight in the world's worst bus terminal. So when people said he descended there, they were saying something enormous. They were saying, there is no human place he refuses to enter. Not joy, not hunger, not betrayal, not torture, not burial, not the place after burial. Even that, especially that. The deepest loneliness people could imagine was not off limits to him. That is one of the great comforts tucked inside the strangeness. Human beings know hidden places, not just graves, though those too. You know the shut-down rooms of shame, grief, regret, old fear, and the sort of sadness that sits on your chest like a badly trained goat. The descent says, even those places are not beyond reach. The Son of God is not delicate. He does not arrive at the edge of your ruin and go, absolutely not. This floor is sticky, and something in here has definitely died. He goes in. And then there is that strange, beautiful part where the tradition imagined him preaching there. Why picture that at all? Because the good news was never meant to sound small. It was not a message for tidy people in clean courtyards only. It was not for the lucky few who happened to be standing in the right century, in the right town, with excellent hearing and no scheduling conflicts. The imagination of the church kept reaching wider, wider than walls, wider than tombs, wider than history's locked doors. So they pictured him announcing freedom in the place least likely to hear it. That image told grieving people that death does not get the final word in its own house. The realm of the dead is not some sealed archive where hope goes to be misfiled forever. Into that silence comes a voice. Into that stillness comes news. Into that long waiting comes movement. Not because the dead had figured it out, not because humanity finally cleaned itself up and became deserving. That would take forever, and frankly, the waiting room already smelled bad enough. No, the announcement comes because he arrives, because grace goes looking, because mercy is not lazy. Then you get to the gates. That image stayed powerful because everybody understands a locked door, a barred gate, a place meant to keep people in and everyone else out. Death had always looked like that. Final, shut, heavily reinforced, the oldest prison on earth. No appeal process, no tunnel, no guard rotation to exploit. Once it took you, that was it. And then the tradition dared to picture those gates broken from the inside. Of course, people loved that image. It is outrageous. It has the energy of a rescue operation, combined with a jailbreak, combined with the world's holiest home invasion. Death built itself a fortress and then discovered it had admitted the one guest it could not hold. That is why the pictures are so vivid. Christ standing over shattered doors, locks split, hinges wrecked. Adam and Eve hauled upward by the wrists because, in most of those images, they are not climbing out under their own power. That part matters too. Humanity is not shown politely strolling to freedom like it had merely been delayed by bad signage. It is being pulled out, rescued, lifted. That is what all those generations wanted to preserve, not a vague optimism, not the thin comfort people offer when they have nothing useful to say and too much confidence anyway. They wanted something sturdier. They wanted to say that the grave is real, death is terrible, sorrow is not pretend, and still none of it is beyond the reach of God. That is where it lands. Jesus truly died, so there is no human death he does not understand from the inside. He entered the underworld, so there is no depth where his presence cannot go. He proclaimed freedom there, so silence and abandonment are not the final atmosphere of the dead. He shattered the gates, so death is no longer a sealed system with absolute control. And once you see it that way, the whole thing settles. The descent is not a gloomy detour before the exciting part. It is part of the victory. Quiet, hidden, unseen by the city above, but real. While people cooked supper, swept courtyards, checked seals, and tried to get through the Sabbath with swollen eyes and aching hearts, the oldest prison in creation was being breached. That is why people kept returning to this story when they buried their own. Not because it made death pleasant. It did not. Graves are still graves. Loss still feels like being hit in the ribs with a brick wrapped in memory. Bodies still fail. Tears still come at stupid times, like while folding laundry or cutting bread. The story never pretended otherwise. It offered something better than denial. It offered company in the dark, and then more than company. It offered deliverance. It said the place that looks most God-forsaken is not God-forsaken at all. It said no pit is too deep, no stone too heavy, no region too silent. It said that even in the hidden places, even in the ancient dark, even where hope had been sitting for ages in the dust with its head in its hands, God had not lost the address. So after all that shadow, all that waiting, all those shut doors, this is what remains. There is no grave outside his reach. There is no depth where he will not go. And even the darkest place is not dark forever. And with the gates behind us and the first light not yet fully risen, the story settles into a quieter kind of victory. You are back near the tomb now, in that grey hour when the world looks undecided. The sky is neither black nor blue. It has that thin, cold colour of watered milk, and the stones around the garden hold the night's chill like they intend to keep it. Your feet are damp from the ground. Everything smells like wet earth, old rock, and the faint, smoky cling of fires burned down to ash. Jerusalem is waking badly. A rooster loses its mind somewhere beyond the wall. A cartwheel scrapes over stone. Someone coughs in a courtyard with the deep, committed cough of a man who has breathed dust for 40 years and plans to continue. Ovens are being coaxed back to life. Water jars knock against hips. The city is doing what cities do, which is to keep functioning with frankly insulting normality while eternity has just been kicked off its hinges. Nobody above ground can see what has already happened below. That is the strange part that lingers. Before anybody starts running breathless through gardens, before linen gets inspected, before doors burst open and people start shouting with the wild eyes of those who have seen the impossible, the dark has already been breached. The ancient lock has already failed. Death has already had a very bad night, and it deserved one. You can almost still hear the echo of those gates going down. Not the clean clang of polished metal either. More like old bronze screaming in protest, iron bars splitting, hinges giving up after ages of smug confidence. The oldest prison in the world had a security failure, and it was not minor. It was catastrophic. Full breach. No manager available. Now the silence afterward feels different. Not empty. Open. That matters. Because there is a kind of silence that suffocates you, and there is a kind that makes room. The silence around the tomb in this hour is the second kind. It feels like the pause after a chain falls off. Like the moment when a barred door is standing wide and nobody has yet adjusted their face about it. The women are still on their way. You can picture them moving through the dim streets with jars and cloths, practical in the middle of heartbreak. They are carrying spices because death is unpleasant, and love in this world often looks like showing up anyway with the supplies nobody wants to need. Myrrh, aloes, burial things. The whole sad, expensive, sticky business. Ancient grief comes with errands. Their hands are cold around the jars. Their eyes are swollen from weeping and too little sleep. Their hair smells faintly of oil and last night's smoke. Sand sticks to their sandals. Every step toward the tomb is the step of someone preparing to care for a body, because that is what they think remains to be done. Tender work, final work, the kind that asks very little except courage and a strong stomach. But down below, that work has already been overtaken by something larger. The dead are not abandoned anymore. Just sit with that for a moment in the world itself, not as an idea polished smooth for a wall hanging. Think of that old place under the earth, stale and joyless and crowded with every generation's exhausted remains. Think of kings sitting in the dust beside shepherds. Think of mothers who buried children, soldiers who died confused, old men who carried promises for decades and still went down into the dark with unanswered ache in their ribs. Now picture those doors open, not symbolically open, open, as in ruined, as in unable to do their one job, as in the sort of structural damage that makes every jailer start sweating through his tunic. The path out exists now. The dark still looks dark because dawn takes time to reach human eyes, but it is broken. The old monopoly is over. Above ground, morning keeps arriving in small, ordinary pieces. A woman sweeps a doorstep. Someone kneads dough with sore wrists. A child cries because a sibling looked at him in the offensive way only siblings can manage before breakfast. A Roman guard shifts his weight and tries to appear like a man whose entire profession has not become embarrassing overnight. Birds fuss in the trees. Light collects slowly on walls, then roofs, then doorposts. Nothing flashy yet. That is almost comforting. The victory does not begin as spectacle. It begins hidden under stone, under soil, under the level where roots creep and bones wait. It begins where no trumpet in the city square announces it. No one posts an update. No courier runs through the street yelling that the impossible has already occurred beneath everyone's feet. It rises quietly. And maybe that is why this part stayed with people so stubbornly. Long after empires puffed themselves up and collapsed in their own expensive sandals, people kept remembering the descent. They painted it. They sang it. They pressed it into creeds with careful words so it would not be lost. He descended to the dead, not almost died, not hovered near death like somebody avoiding a puddle, went all the way down, into the last human place. That line stayed because people kept needing it. You stand beside graves long enough in this world, and you begin to understand why. The soil always looks too ordinary. The air keeps moving. Someone nearby is discussing bread prices, or a sore donkey, or whose cousin said what at supper, and you want to grab the whole planet by the shoulders and say, "Excuse me, something enormous has happened." But the planet is very committed to carrying on, so people learned to carry these words instead, not as decoration, as ballast, as the sort of thing whispered beside a burial cave, or later in churchyards, or by narrow beds where breathing had become thin and irregular, and everyone in the room had that stricken, practical look. Lamps smoking, linen folded, hands clasped, somebody trying not to cry and failing with great sincerity. In those hours, the memory returned. He went there too. He did not skip the grave like it was beneath him. He filled it with his presence. You see it in the old icons. Christ standing over the shattered dark, not delicate about it either. Doors under his feet, locks scattered. Adam being yanked up by the wrist with the urgency of someone hauling a friend out of a ditch. Eve beside him. David somewhere nearby, still looking like he'd compose a song about this before lunch, if given half a chance. Prophets, kings, nobodies, all blinking into a freedom they had not been able to manufacture for themselves. It is not a polite little scene. It has movement, dust, surprise. The holy chaos of a rescue nobody inside the prison could have staged. You look at those images and can almost smell the broken earth, the cold stone, the old trapped air suddenly stirred. A dungeon aired out at last. About time. And the memory kept going. Through hymns in cold stone buildings where winter crept in through cracks and everyone sang with numb fingers. Through funerals where the incense was too thick and the mourners too tired. Through nights when people lay awake with grief, sitting on their chest like a very rude cat. Through plague years, war years, years when graves had to be dug quickly, years when they had names for the dead, and years when they did not. Still, this remained. The doors were broken once. That meant something could be said at gravesides that was not denial and not cheap cheerfulness either. Nobody had to pretend death was lovely. It is not lovely. It smells wrong. It empties rooms in the cruelest way. It leaves blankets folded and cups untouched and sandals by doors that nobody will wear again. It makes a house feel suddenly too large and too quiet and offensively full of objects. But it is no longer sealed. That is the quiet victory waiting here before sunrise fully shows its face. The world still has tombs. Tears still happen. Bodies still fail with terrible timing. Human beings still stand in cemeteries with wind in their clothes and dirt under their nails, and that stunned look grief gives everyone. None of that is brushed aside. But underneath it, deeper than the grave goes, something has changed. The deepest place has already been entered. The oldest doors have already come off. The morning now begins to gather itself for the news above ground. Light reaches farther into the garden. Stone edges sharpen. Olive leaves show their grey-green undersides in the breeze. Somewhere nearby, someone is about to discover that the world is not as closed as it looked last night. The first astonishment is almost here, but the hidden work was done in darkness. That is why people kept remembering it when their own lives went dark. They remembered a Lord who did not remain at the safe surface. They remembered wounds carried into the pit, authority brought into the place of dust, and a victory accomplished where nobody thought victories happened. Not on a throne with banners snapping overhead, but in the underworld, among the dead, in the oldest nightmare humanity knew. And that memory endured. It endured in whispered prayers over fresh graves and old bones, in candlelight flickering against painted walls, in hymns carried by tired voices, in the stubborn line of the creed spoken by people who had buried far too many and still refused to believe abandonment got the last word. It endured because the earth keeps taking bodies, and still the story insists the earth does not keep them forever. The sky is brighter now, not fully day, not yet, but enough to see the path, enough to catch the outline of the tomb and the garden and the stone, and the place where sorrow came expecting one thing and was met by another. The air is still cold on your skin. The world still smells of rock, soil, and extinguished fire. Morning is arriving without hurry, and beneath it all, the broken gates remain broken. The dead were not left alone. The dark was entered. The grave was not skipped, and the old story kept being told softly and stubbornly through centuries of dust and bells and tears, until even now it lingers at the edge of morning, patient as light on stone. Somewhere a tomb stands open. Somewhere a grave is visited with less despair than before. Somewhere the memory is spoken again over the sleeping dead. And somewhere the story continues.